I'm at Springbrook National Park in Australia, and I'm here to photograph some glowworms. So I'll talk about my technique and setup and what I did to get these photos. Hopefully they come out good. We'll see how it goes. I really planned this shot to a T, and hopefully all the editing goes well. And yeah, stay tuned.
All right, I'm recording this from at home, stateside here. It's a little easier than doing it on the road. So you can see here, there's the waterfall, there's the natural bridge, lots of bats, really cool stuff. The area set up really interestingly. They put a lot of work into this. You kind of walk down these stairs that takes you under the natural bridge. I didn't have a chance to do this in daylight hours. This is more like around twilight, just before sunset. But when you go down the stairs, it gives you this view here. And this is the picture I wanted to talk about today. I'm really proud of this photo. I really like it for its compositional reasons, for how much work it took getting into it, and the fact that, not to toot my own horn, I haven't seen a photo as good of this spot at this spot. So I was having a lot of issues trying to get this photo. I went the night before. There was a lot of people. People were shining lights, using their phones. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And I just wasn't getting very good shots. So I said, okay, I got to come back the next night. I came up with a plan. I'll show you my schematic. And I executed it accordingly. So let's just talk about the composition real quick. I really like the way I position these 3 colonies of glowworms, and all the leaning lines kind of take your eyes directly to the waterfall. All roads lead to Rome kind of thing. I really like it. This took a lot of effort trying to figure out the composition because it's so dark in the cave. Let's just talk about glowworms real quick. This is what it looks like up close. This is when you're in the park. Please, please, please bring a red light. First of all, the light doesn't go as far. The glowworms don't react to red light. And also, when you're walking the trails, there are glowworms everywhere. It's not just in the caves. I wish I knew that beforehand. They're all over the trails. They're in these little holes. This is a close-up view, and I kind of pointed out, using common terms, where their head, their butt are, and then these little pearly things are a mucus trap, which they collect food. They're predatory larvae. All right, so things that I needed were a tripod, red light, my camera. I used a fast lens that I specifically use for astro and for nighttime stuff, but you could still use an f2.8, something like that. Actually, you probably could even use an f4. You're just going to need to do additional tricks such as noise reduction, stacking, and longer exposures, because these glowworms don't move. It's not like the Milky Way where you have to do like a 30-second or less exposure depending on your focal length. This is more, they're just sitting there. So you can really play with other lenses. You don't have to get super crazy stuff. I'm also strongly recommending a lens towel or a lens cleaner, because this is something I didn't anticipate. That waterfall is putting out so much water, at least when we were there. The water was getting on my lens. I had to clean it every time I took the lens cap off. So that's my trick around waterfalls. You keep the lens cap on, and then you only take it off when you're about to take a frame. And then my bag is waterproof, but I'd say bring a bag with a cover, because you're also in a part of Australia where it rains a lot, but the area that these glowworms live in, it's a very high humidity environment. And I really can't stress enough, use a red light on the trails when you get down into the cavern. The signs say don't use any lights. You can use like a gentle phone light or something to see where you're walking, but a red light is preferable. A lot of people weren't listening, weren't paying attention to the rules, and so annoying. But it really does affect the glowworms, which I'll talk about why I had to complicate this photo so much. I took this photo the most ethical way I could think of to not disturb the glowworms. They're very sensitive to light, and it can very strongly negatively impact them because this cave is always getting a lot of tourists. So the first night I wasn't having a lot of luck, so I went back and I literally took pen and paper and said, okay, this is how I'm going to do it. So I'm going to take a base image, and this is how I edited it. And because I'm shooting at higher ISOs sometimes, I pretty much always throw them through pure RAW. And I did a HDR, which I'll explain how I do that with water. And then I did a manual bracketing. So I create the base image, and then for the glowworms, I just kept my tripod in the same spot, and I tried not to move the entire time. So I kind of had a corner off part of the railing there, which wasn't a big deal that night. There weren't actually as many people as the night prior, but it gets super busy in there, lots of tour groups. So sometimes you can't always do this. And then I go into, I use Affinity Photo 2, and I blended the images together using layers and masking. And then I kind of dodged and burned where necessary. But I'll explain why I used the HDR for this image. So when you pull up this image, this is what I call my hero shot. This is the base image. I'll show it. There was some editing I did here already, so I kind of dodged that area in the previous edit, so we don't have to worry about that. But this is basically my base image from the HDR, and I chose this technique at twilight because the glowworms don't start glowing until it gets dark enough. That's how they attract their prey. Because I wanted to get the details in all the rocks. I wanted to get this nice composition with the rocks here. I wanted to get the waterfall nice and milky smooth, but I wanted the viewer to see the valley that this cave is also in. You kind of descend the stairs just to the right of this image, and there's a little bit of a railing out there, but you really can't see it unless you look. So I wanted this to look like a pure nighttime image, but the night before, my camera was getting up to like 50,000 ISO. I got junk images. You couldn't see the details because when it gets dark here, there's no external lighting because of the worms. There's a bat colony of rare bats. So it's all for environmental protection. So I had to do a composition. So I kept my tripod in the same spot, and then I took 3 frames with the glowworms actually glowing. And then what I did was I just painted in using layers, and I could even delete this mask. So that's what the glowworm frames look like. And I used 3 of them because of noise. So I still put them through DxO Pure Raw, really great software for that. But when you stack it in Affinity Photo 2, it also does noise reduction. So this is, in theory, the cleanest noise you can get from your image. And then I'll just do kind of a quick edit. If you're not familiar with masking, I remember when I was learning photo editing, it's one of the most underappreciated techniques, especially for landscape photography. So, I just kind of gently, started with, what does this look like as my base image, right? So I just did a quick one. Let me see. And what I like about masking is it's non-destructive. So you could undo all this super easily, right? That actually looks pretty good. I wanted the detail kind of where it counted. So you could see some of the glowworms didn't make it in. So you just kind of mask those back in. Not a big deal. All right, so you kind of play with that. I did some dodging of the glowworms to kind of on this side, just to brighten it a little bit. I'm sure back in the 70s, there were way more glowworms, but even though they try to protect the glowworms, this is where they're at right now. So for this masking, it works just like Photoshop. The black paintbrush will open up the top layer to show you what's on the bottom layer, right? So that's basically how I did this photo. And then, I did a few more edits to make it look, more aesthetic. Like I fixed a lot of these spots, and I guess I had moved, so, you can see how it's not an exact overlay. I think when I did these photos too, I did a auto alignment, but yeah, if you paint this in enough, it gets rid of all that kind of blurriness, right? So the reason why this photo took so much work, doing the HDR and then doing the separate photos is that, like I said before, these are very sensitive to light. They really will dim, and sometimes they don't produce more light for the rest of the night, and they could die. They could starve to death. And it really does take a very little bit of light. There are people who would open up their phone and look at it, but they didn't realize that there were glowworms right above them, and the colonies above their heads would dim, and it's a real shame. So this is the most ethical way that still protects the glowworms, but you can get a good image to get this type of shot. This is not an uncommon technique, though. For some more advanced landscape shots where it's really, really dark and you still want to get the landscape, unless you shoot around a moon that's not full, but can draw some paint in some of the landscape, sometimes that's the only way to get those nice detailed shots while getting something like the Milky Way or whatever you're trying to accomplish. I'm not going to show you the HDR blending because it's pretty simple in an Affinity Photo 2. You just go to File, New HDR Merge, and then I try to always keep these in a folder. So what I did here, I just took the sample images. You want to start off with, I like starting off with the highlights for this because it's really easy to get into the shadows. You don't need to worry about that. It's super dark. But I was just trying to get all the details in the rocks. And then you could see I progressively get darker and darker until you get whatever you desire for the other image. So I wanted no overblown highlights in any parts of the image. I think for the edit, I had to take out this one because it was a little too bright, and Affinity Photo 2 had a hard time blending it, but I like doing it that way. So for water, here's a trick I learned. I can't claim credit for this. You want to keep the speed of the water the same, right? But if you're blending it with HDR, a lot of the times it'll change the shutter speed, which can result in the water droplets being frozen in time or an inconsistent waterfall. So a trick that I learned, especially with new cameras, you can use your ISO to shift the scene, because now the new cameras, you can go up to 20,000. It's not a big deal. So if you start, I made this meter, if you start with like a 3 stops up, right, a +3, you're using your ISO to do that. So, you could start at whatever it is, 15,000. You can keep your shutter speed the same to keep that water milky smooth. And then you could drop it down to whatever, 10,000, and then 5,000, and then whatever, 1,000, and then maybe an 800, just depends on what you're shooting. And I'll still I just go until I preview the highlights in my image. And that's kind of what my light meter looks like, but I'm manually shifting it. You can't always get it exactly on the exact stop. It's okay if it's off like by 1/3 of a stop. It's just easier for the software to merge it if they're nice and even. Whatever you use, it's just consistent and even. But that's a trick that I learned. And on Canon, they only do 3 photos for HDR, but I think the Sonys can do like 12 photos. So you could just use a mode like that too. But that's how I got this base image here, was doing an HDR and then just painting in the glowworms here. And that's the best way I could think of doing it without disturbing the animals. So hopefully you enjoyed that edit. It's a photo I really enjoy, really proud of it. No glowworms were harmed in the making of this image. So stay tuned for more tips and tricks.